So there I was, watching the most pompous collection of alien bureaucrats in the galaxy pat themselves on the back for what they thought was their most brilliant idea yet. The Galactic Council chamber, a gleaming monument to bureaucratic excess, buzzed with the kind of self-satisfied energy you'd expect from a group that had just solved what they considered the universe's most pressing mystery. Commander Vextol, a 7-foot-tall blue-skinned windbag with more decorative medals than actual achievements, stood at the center podium, gesturing dramatically with his 4 arms. His voice carried that special blend of arrogance and ignorance that only comes from centuries of never being wrong because nobody dares to correct you. "Fellow council members," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber like a bad opera performance. "We have detected highly unusual energy signatures from the 3rd planet of the Sol system. The readings are concerning." Concerning? Right. Because apparently when you've spent your entire existence as the galaxy's self-appointed hall monitors, anything that doesn't fit your neat little categories becomes a cosmic crisis. The energy readings he was referring to were, of course, just humans being humans. Nuclear testing, space launches, the occasional microwave explosion when someone forgot to take the metal spoon out of their soup. But to the Galactic Council, this looked like the opening act of an intergalactic war. "The species designation is Homo sapiens," Vextol continued, consulting his holographic notes with the seriousness of someone reading a death sentence. "They appear to be a primitive civilization that has barely achieved rudimentary space travel. However, their energy output suggests they may be developing weapons of unprecedented destructive capability." At this point, Technician Zimko, a nervous little green fellow with the survival instincts of a caffeinated squirrel, raised his hand. Zimko had the unfortunate distinction of being the Council's go-to guy for discreet observation missions, which was bureaucrat speak for spy on people and try not to get caught. "Commander," Zimko squeaked, his voice barely audible over the chamber's ambient humming, "perhaps we should consider a more comprehensive approach to gathering intelligence." Vextol's expression suggested that Zimsko had just proposed they all start wearing tutus and performing interpretive dance. "Technician, we are the Galactic Council. We have maintained peace and order across 47 star systems for over 3 millennia. I think we can handle one primitive planet." Famous last words right there. "We will deploy our most advanced observation probe," Vextol declared, as if he were announcing the launch of a new galactic flagship rather than what amounted to a very expensive spy camera. "It will record exactly 72 hours of human behavior and return with a complete assessment of their threat level." The probe in question, designated PEEP 3000, was indeed a marvel of galactic engineering. Invisible to most detection systems, equipped with universal translators, and programmed with the collective knowledge of the galaxy's most successful civilizations. It was designed to observe, catalog, and analyze any species with the cold, logical precision that had made the Galactic Council the universe's most effective at making terrible decisions based on incomplete information. "The mission parameters are simple," Vextol continued, warming to his theme. "Observe their military capabilities, social structures, and technological advancement. Determine if they pose a threat to galactic stability. File a report. We should have this whole situation wrapped up by next week." The assembled council members nodded approvingly, their various tentacles, appendages, and sensory organs bobbing in unanimous agreement. After all, what could possibly go wrong with a straightforward surveillance mission on a planet full of barely evolved primates? Zimko, to his credit, looked like he wanted to ask a few more questions, but years of working for the council had taught him that curiosity was not a valued trait in their organization. Instead, he simply nodded and began running through the probe's pre-flight checklist. "Probe systems nominal," he reported. "Stealth field active. Recording equipment calibrated. Launching in T-30 seconds." As the PEEP 3000 launched toward Earth, the council chamber filled with the satisfied murmur of beings who believed they had just solved another problem before it could become troublesome. They had no idea they were about to receive the most terrifying intelligence report in galactic history. If they had known what the next 72 hours would bring, they might have just pretended those energy readings were a glitch in their sensors and gone back to arguing about import tariffs on crystallized methane. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. The PEEP 3000 probe arrived at Earth on what would later be recorded in galactic history as the weekend that broke the universe's understanding of rational behavior. It materialized in the Earth's atmosphere on a Saturday morning, its advanced sensors immediately beginning to scan for signs of intelligent life. What it found instead was flora. Now, I should probably mention that the probe's artificial intelligence was programmed with the behavioral patterns of 47 different civilizations, all of which had developed along predictable lines. Wars were fought for resources or territory. Recreational activities involved mild physical exercise or intellectual pursuits. Dangerous situations were avoided at all costs. The PEEP 3000 was prepared to observe a species that followed these basic rules of survival. It was not prepared for Chad Bronkowski. The probe's first recorded observation was of a shirtless human male, approximately 25 years old, who had apparently decided that the best way to celebrate his weekend was to wrestle a 9-foot alligator while live-streaming the encounter to something called TikTok. The probe's computer systems immediately began flashing warning signals as it tried to process what it was witnessing. Recording anomalous behavior, PEEP 3 logged, in its daily report. Subject appears to be engaging in voluntary combat with apex predator for no apparent survival benefit, checking for signs of mental illness or external coercion. But Chad wasn't coerced. He wasn't mentally ill. He was just really excited about the possibility of going viral. The probe watched in mechanical horror as Chad grabbed the alligator by the tail, spun it around like a lasso, and shouted, "This is for the views, baby!" before launching himself onto the reptile's back. The alligator, for its part, seemed more confused than threatened. It was probably wondering why evolution had bothered creating a species this aggressively stupid. But Chad was just the appetizer. The probe's sensors picked up another disturbance, approximately 3 miles away, where a group of college students from the University of Florida had decided to test their homemade wingsuits by launching themselves off a dormitory roof. The probe quickly redirected its attention, hoping to observe more rational behavior. It was disappointed. "Okay guys, the physics totally check out," announced the apparent leader of the group, a young woman named Becca, who was wearing what appeared to be a bedsheet attached to a backpack frame. "I calculated the wind speed, the angle of descent, and the probability of death. We're looking at maybe a 15% chance of serious injury. Those are good odds." The probe's computer core nearly overheated trying to process the phrase "good odds" in relation to a 15% chance of serious injury. In the galactic community, a 0.001% chance of discomfort was considered an unacceptable risk. Recording additional anomalous behavior, PEEP 33 noted. Subjects are engaging in high-risk activities with apparent enthusiasm, checking atmospheric composition for mind-altering substances. The atmospheric readings came back normal. The humans were doing this completely sober. Becca took a running leap off the roof, her homemade wings catching the wind for exactly 3 seconds before she crashed into a nearby tree. Her friends cheered. The probe's logic circuits sparked. "That was awesome," Becca called out from the tree branches, apparently uninjured despite having just face-planted into an oak. "Who's next?" The probe decided to relocate, hoping to find more representative examples of human behavior. It drifted toward what appeared to be a quiet residential area, where surely it would observe the kind of peaceful domestic activities that characterized civilized species. Instead, it found Grandma Kowalski walking home from the grocery store. Now, Grandma Kowalski was 73 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and carried a purse that could have been classified as a weapon of mass destruction. She had survived the Great Depression, raised 6 children, and had exactly 0 patience for nonsense. So when a would-be mugger approached her with a knife demanding her purse, she responded in a way that would have made the Galactic Council's military advisors weep with fear. "You want my purse?" she asked, hefting the leather bag that contained, among other things, a full set of brass knuckles her late husband had given her for their 40th anniversary. "Come and take it, you little punk." The probe watched in fascination as a septuagenarian human proceeded to beat a man half her age into submission using nothing but a handbag and what appeared to be several decades of accumulated rage. The mugger fled, and Grandma Kowalski continued her walk home, pausing only to fix her hair and mutter something about kids these days. Recording unprecedented aggressive behavior in elderly population. PEEP 3000 logged, its sensors now permanently stuck in high alert mode. Subject displays combat capabilities far exceeding expected parameters for age and physical condition, requesting immediate backup analysis. But the backup analysis would have to wait, because the probe had just detected something that made its previous observations look like a peaceful meditation retreat. Somewhere in the distance it could hear the sound of explosions, cheering, and what sounded like the Jackass theme song. The probe's final log entry for the day was brief and telling, beginning to suspect that initial assessment of human threat level may have been inadequate. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, Zimko was monitoring the probe's transmissions with growing alarm. The data streams were filled with footage of humans doing things that shouldn't be physically possible, emotionally healthy, or legally permitted. He kept checking his equipment, convinced that something was malfunctioning. "Commander," he called out to Vextol, who was busy congratulating himself on the mission's early success. "We're receiving some unusual readings from the probe." "Unusual how?" Vextol asked, not bothering to look up from his victory lap. Zimko stared at the screen, watching Chad Bronkowski high-five his alligator before posting the video to social media. "I think we might want to extend the observation period," he said quietly. "This is going to take more than 72 hours to understand." He had no idea how right he was. The next morning, the PEEP 3000 found itself hovering over what its database identified as a military training facility. The probe's logic circuits, still reeling from the previous day's encounters, were desperately hoping to observe some conventional warfare preparations. Organized drills, weapon maintenance, strategic planning. The kind of boring, predictable military behavior that every civilized species exhibited. Instead, it discovered that the United States Army had turned physical fitness into a contact sport. Major Rita Kowalski, Grandma Kowalski's niece and apparently the inheritor of the family's take-no-prisoners gene, was overseeing what the military called morning PT. What it actually resembled was a cross between American gladiators and a psychological experiment designed to test the limits of human competitive insanity. "All right, listen up," Major Kowalski barked at her assembled troops, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 15 years turning civilians into soldiers and enjoyed every minute of it. "Today's challenge is simple. First squad to complete the obstacle course gets weekend passes. Last squad gets to clean the latrine with toothbrushes." The probe watched with growing alarm as soldiers began launching themselves through obstacle courses like they were competing for Olympic gold, instead of just trying to stay in shape. These weren't the methodical, efficient movements of trained warriors. These were the desperate, glory-seeking antics of humans who had turned survival training into entertainment. Sergeant Mike Tank Morrison, a mountain of a man who looked like he'd bench-pressed small cars for fun, was currently attempting to carry 3 other soldiers through a mud pit while singing the theme song from the A-Team. His squad was cheering him on like he was performing at Madison Square Garden instead of a Tuesday morning training exercise. "Recording unusual military behavior," PEEP 3000 noted, its sensors tracking Tank's progress. "Subjects appear to be treating combat preparation as recreational activity, checking for signs of pre-battle psychological conditioning." But this wasn't psychological conditioning. This was just humans being competitive about literally everything, including who could do the most push-ups while reciting the alphabet backwards in Spanish. The probe was so busy trying to catalog the various ways humans had weaponized physical fitness that it almost missed the moment when Private Jessica Hawk Chen spotted it. Hawk had earned her nickname by having the kind of situational awareness that would make a professional paranoid jealous. She was the soldier who noticed when someone moved a pen on her desk, who could identify aircraft by their engine sounds, and who had just spotted a supposedly invisible alien probe hovering 30 feet above the obstacle course. "Major," she called out, pointing directly at the PEEP 3000's position. "We've got a bogey at 2 o'clock, approximately 30 feet elevation, moving in a surveillance pattern." The probe's stealth systems immediately kicked into overdrive. According to its programming, no primitive species should be able to detect its advanced cloaking technology. The probe ran a quick diagnostic, confirmed all systems were functioning normally, and concluded that Private Chen was probably just confused. Major Kowalski, however, was not in the habit of ignoring her soldiers' observations. She pulled out a pair of binoculars and scanned the area Hawk had indicated. For a moment she saw nothing. Then the sunlight hit the probe's hull at just the right angle, creating a brief shimmer in the air. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered, lowering the binoculars with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. "Looks like we've got ourselves a genuine UFO." The probe's computer systems began calculating escape routes, expecting the humans to respond with the standard primitive reactions: panic, confusion, maybe some religious ceremonies. Instead, Major Kowalski turned to her assembled troops and announced, "Change of plans, people! We're going alien hunting." The soldiers' response was immediate and enthusiastic. They didn't scatter in terror or demand to call their superiors. They started placing bets on who would catch the thing first. "I got $20 on Alpha Squad," called out Tank, already grabbing a net launcher from the equipment shed. "They've got the best climbers." "They're on," replied Staff Sergeant Lopez, the leader of Bravo Squad, who was busy organizing what appeared to be a human pyramid designed to reach the probe's altitude. We'll have that thing down in 10 minutes. The probe watched in mechanical horror as the human military began treating its presence not as a potential threat to national security, but as the morning's entertainment. They were approaching the situation with the same competitive enthusiasm they brought to everything else, turning what should have been a first contact scenario into a game show. Recording unprecedented military response to unknown threat. Peep 3 logged frantically. Subjects are treating potential extraterrestrial contact as recreational challenge. Behavioral patterns do not match any known military doctrine. That's because human military doctrine had never actually covered what to do when soldiers decided that catching a UFO would make an awesome story to tell at the bar later. The probe tried to gain altitude, but Hawk was already coordinating with the base's radar operators to track its movement. Tank was loading what appeared to be a modified T-shirt cannon with a capture net, and Major Kowalski was on the radio, casually informing her superiors that her unit had discovered an alien probe and was handling the situation. "What do you mean, handling the situation?" came the voice of Colonel Peterson over the radio, sounding like a man who had just realized his day was about to become much more complicated. "Well, sir," Major Kowalski replied, watching as her soldiers began constructing what looked like a human slingshot. "We're going to catch it and see what it wants. Standard procedure for unidentified aerial phenomena." There was a long pause on the radio. "Major, I don't think we have a standard procedure for this." "We do now, sir." The probe's escape systems finally engaged, and it shot upward at maximum velocity, leaving behind a group of soldiers who were already planning their next attempt. As it fled, the probe's sensors picked up Major Kowalski's final transmission to her superiors. "UFO is currently evading capture, but we've got its movement patterns figured out. Request permission to set up a perimeter and try again tomorrow. The boys are really excited about this." The probe's final log entry for the encounter was a masterpiece of artificial intelligence having an existential crisis. Military response to unknown threat involves competitive recreational activities and apparent enthusiasm for direct confrontation. Recommend immediate revision of threat assessment protocols. These humans appear to treat potential extinction-level events as entertainment opportunities. Back at the Galactic Council, Zimko was staring at the incoming data with the expression of someone who had just realized he might have accidentally poked a sleeping dragon. The probe's footage showed humans not just surviving chaos, but actively seeking it out and turning it into a team-building exercise. "Commander," he called out, his voice carrying a note of panic that was becoming increasingly familiar. "I think we need to talk about extending this mission. These humans aren't reacting the way they're supposed to." Vextol, still confident in his assessment of primitive Earth creatures, waved dismissively. "Technician, they're a young species. They'll learn proper threat assessment eventually. Continue the mission." If only he knew that the humans had already learned threat assessment. They had just decided that the appropriate response to most threats was to see if they could turn them into a sport. After its harrowing encounter with the military, the Peep 3000 made a desperate decision. It would observe civilians. Surely, the probe reasoned, with whatever passed for logic in its increasingly strained circuits, regular non-military humans would display the kind of peaceful, rational behavior that characterized normal civilizations. No weapons training. No competitive instincts, just ordinary people living ordinary lives. The probe selected what appeared to be the most mundane location possible, Maple Grove Estates, a suburban subdivision where the biggest excitement should have been someone forgetting to mow their lawn. The probe's sensors detected no military installations, no extreme sports facilities, no alligator wrestling arenas, just neat rows of houses, manicured lawns, and what looked like a community center where, surely, nothing more dangerous than a book club meeting could occur. The probe was about to learn that there is nothing more dangerous than a homeowners association meeting. Recording civilian observation attempt number 1, Peep 33, logged with digital optimism. Location appears to be residential community center. Subjects gathering for what appears to be administrative meeting, expecting routine bureaucratic procedures. If only it had known that human bureaucracy was actually a form of psychological warfare. The meeting was called to order by Martha Hendricks, the kind of woman who had turned passive-aggressive communication into an art form. She was the HOA president, a position she had won through a combination of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli weep with admiration, and a campaign strategy that involved systematically destroying the reputations of anyone who opposed her. "Tonight's agenda," Marta announced, her voice carrying the deceptive sweetness of poisoned honey, "includes the ongoing violation of Section 12.3 of our community guidelines by the Henderson family and their frankly offensive garden gnome display." The probe sensors immediately focused on Bill Henderson, a mild-mannered accountant who had apparently committed the cardinal sin of placing 3 decorative gnomes in his front yard. Bill looked like the kind of guy who apologized when other people bumped into him. He was about to discover that the suburbs had turned him into a hardened warrior. "Mrs. Hendricks," Bill said, standing up with the quiet dignity of a man who had reached his breaking point. "Those gnomes were a gift from my grandmother. They're staying." What followed was 45 minutes of the most vicious, passive-aggressive warfare the probe had ever witnessed. Martha deployed tactics that would have impressed the Galactic Council's most experienced diplomats. Veiled threats disguised as concerns for property values, strategic alliances with other homeowners, and the masterful use of Robert's Rules of Order as a weapon of mass destruction. "Perhaps Mr. Henderson doesn't understand the importance of maintaining our community's aesthetic standards," Martha suggested, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "After all, we wouldn't want to become the kind of neighborhood where people think anything goes." The probe watched in fascination as Bill Henderson, mild-mannered accountant, transformed into a suburban gladiator. "You know what, Martha? You're absolutely right. We wouldn't want anything to go. So I'm ordering 12 more gnomes. Big ones. With LED lights." The meeting erupted. Neighbors chose sides with the intensity of medieval kingdoms preparing for war. The Johnsons allied with the Hendersons because they had never liked Martha's policy on mailbox colors. The Patels sided with Martha because the Hendersons' gnomes were apparently blocking their view of the sunset. Mrs. Chen, from down the street, proposed a compromise involving gnome-free zones and established gnome territories, which somehow made everyone angrier. "Recording unprecedented civilian conflict over decorative garden accessories," P3000 noted, its processors working overtime to categorize the strategic maneuvering. Subjects appear to be engaging in territorial warfare, using parliamentary procedure as primary weapons system. It was decided to relocate before the HOA meeting devolved into actual violence. It had seen enough of human conflict resolution to last several processing cycles. Surely, it thought, a children's birthday party would provide a more peaceful observation opportunity. The probe arrived at the Johnson residence just as little Tommy Johnson's 8th birthday party was reaching peak chaos. The probe's sensors detected approximately 15 small humans, a known number of adults, and what appeared to be enough sugar to power a small spacecraft. "Recording civilian family gathering," Peep3 logged hopefully. "Subjects appear to be celebrating offspring's aging milestone, expecting traditional gift exchange and mild recreational activities." What it got instead was a masterclass in how humans had weaponized childhood entertainment. The birthday party was being organized by Carol Johnson, a woman who had turned her son's birthday into a competitive showcase of parental superiority. She had hired a professional party planner, rented a bouncy castle that was larger than most apartments, and was currently overseeing what appeared to be a military-style logistics operation involving party favors, themed decorations, and enough food to feed a small army. "Welcome to Tommy's Superhero Spectacular," Carol announced to the assembled parents, her voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone who had spent 3 months planning this event and was determined to make it the most memorable birthday party in suburban history. "We have 17 different activities planned, professional photographers to capture every moment, and a surprise guest appearance by Captain Lightning himself." The probe watched as the parents immediately began comparing notes on party planning strategies, costume quality, and gift appropriateness. What should have been a simple celebration of a child's birthday had somehow become a competition between adults who were treating 8-year-olds as judges in a parenting contest. "Jennifer's party last month only had 12 activities," whispered Linda Morrison to her husband, while eyeing the elaborate obstacle course that Carol had constructed in the backyard. "We're going to have to step up our game for Katie's party next month." The children, meanwhile, had completely ignored the carefully planned activities and were engaged in what appeared to be a sugar-fueled demolition derby, using the bouncy castle as their primary weapon. They had turned the innocent inflatable structure into a gladiatorial arena where 8-year-olds were performing aerial maneuvers that would have impressed professional acrobats. "Recording concerning juvenile behavior," Peep3 noted, watching little Tommy Johnson execute a perfect somersault while simultaneously launching himself off the bouncy castle walls. Subjects appear to be engaging in high-risk recreational activities with apparent guardian approval. The parents weren't just approving of the chaos, they were filming it. Every dangerous jump, every near collision, every moment of potential catastrophe was being captured on smartphones and immediately uploaded to social media, with captions like, "My little daredevil," and "Boys will be boys." The probe's attention was drawn to a group of parents who had started their own competition. Who could capture the most spectacular footage of their children's death-defying party antics? They were using professional-grade cameras, drone equipment, and what appeared to be a sophisticated social media strategy to document their offspring's recreational near-death experiences. "That's nothing," bragged Steve Martinez, showing off footage of his 5-year-old daughter climbing the outside of the bouncy castle. "Last week, Sophia decided to see if she could jump from the swing set to the trampoline. Got 12,000 views on TikTok." The probe's circuits were beginning to overheat from trying to process the concept of parents encouraging their children to engage in activities that would have been considered extreme sports on most civilized planets. But the real breakdown came when Carol Johnson unveiled the party's grand finale, a piñata filled with candy that the children were supposed to attack with wooden sticks while blindfolded. The probe watched in mechanical horror as adults handed weapons to sugar-intoxicated children and encouraged them to swing wildly at a suspended target. "Recording a parent training exercise for juvenile warriors," P33 logged desperately. "Adult subjects are providing weapons to underdeveloped humans and encouraging aggressive behavior towards symbolic targets." The piñata lasted exactly 37 seconds before the children, working with the kind of tactical coordination that would have impressed military strategists, completely destroyed their target and divided the spoils with ruthless efficiency. The adults cheered and took pictures. The probe's final observation came when it attempted to find refuge at what appeared to be a peaceful yoga class in the community center. The advertisement had promised gentle yoga for stress relief and meditation for inner peace. The probe's battered AI was desperately hoping for some evidence that humans were capable of non-competitive, non-destructive activities. Instead, it discovered that humans had turned inner peace into a contact sport. The yoga class was being led by Serenity Williams, a woman who had somehow managed to make meditation competitive. She was currently guiding her students through what she called advanced flexibility challenges, which appeared to involve seeing who could contort their bodies into the most impossible positions while maintaining what she called mindful awareness. "Remember, everyone," Serenity announced, in the kind of soothing voice that people use right before they destroy your will to live. "Yoga is not about competition. It's about finding your personal best and then pushing beyond it to achieve poses that most people think are physically impossible." The probe watched as middle-aged suburbanites attempted to twist themselves into shapes that violated several laws of physics. They were approaching meditation with the same competitive intensity they brought to everything else, turning a practice designed for inner peace into a flexibility Olympics. "I can hold a headstand for 3 minutes," announced Margaret Chen, balancing upside down while discussing her meditation achievements. "How long can you hold yours?" "Recording civilian recreational activity," Peep3 logged, its voice synthesis program beginning to develop what sounded suspiciously like hysteria. "Subjects have converted spiritual practice into competitive physical challenge. Paramedics have been summoned to render aid to injured participants." The paramedics, when they arrived, treated the yoga injuries with the casual professionalism of people who had seen this exact scenario dozens of times before. They weren't surprised. They weren't concerned. They were just efficiently treating people who had pulled muscles while trying to achieve enlightenment faster than their neighbors. "Typical Tuesday," one of the paramedics commented to his partner while helping Margaret Chen, who had somehow managed to get stuck in what appeared to be a human pretzel. "Wait until you see what happens at the seniors' water aerobics class. Those people are insane." The probe's final log entry for the day was a digital scream of confusion. "Civilian population appears to have weaponized all aspects of daily life. Subjects convert peaceful activities into competitive challenges, treat child rearing as extreme sport, and engage in bureaucratic warfare over lawn decorations. Recommend immediate reassessment of species classification. These humans appear to be incapable of non-competitive behavior." Back at the Galactic Council, Zimko was staring at the incoming data with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about intelligent life was wrong. The probe's footage showed humans treating normal daily activities like they were training for some kind of cosmic Olympics. "Commander," he called out, his voice now carrying a note of genuine panic, "we need to abort this mission. These humans aren't just aggressive toward threats, they're competitive about everything. They turn their children's birthday parties into combat training exercises." Vextal, still reviewing reports from more predictable civilizations, barely looked up. "Technician, they're organizing social gatherings and practicing physical fitness. This is normal civilian behavior." Zimko stared at the screen, watching footage of 8-year-olds performing aerial maneuvers that would have killed most adult members of the Galactic Council. "Sir, I don't think anything about these humans is normal." He was about to be proven catastrophically right. By the third day of its mission, the PEEP 3000 probe had developed what could only be described as a digital nervous breakdown. Its AI had been programmed to observe and categorize intelligent behavior based on the accumulated wisdom of 47 civilizations, none of which had prepared it for a species that treated every aspect of existence as a competitive sport. The probe was desperately hoping to find some evidence that humans were capable of rational, cooperative behavior when faced with actual problems. That's when it detected the emergency broadcasts coming from the small town of Millbrook, population 8,847. Recording emergency situation, PEEP 3 logged with what might have been relief in its synthesized voice. Natural disaster detected. Subjects should display standard crisis response patterns, panic, requests for external assistance, temporary suspension of normal social behaviors pending rescue operations. The emergency was significant by any measure. The Millbrook River Bridge, the town's only connection to the outside world, had collapsed during the night after a combination of spring flooding and a structural failure that had been 20 years in the making. The bridge was completely impassable, cutting off the town's access to emergency services, supply deliveries, and evacuation routes. The probe arrived, expecting to document the kind of orderly crisis response that characterized mature civilizations. Organized evacuation procedures, systematic resource allocation, and patient waiting for professional rescue teams to arrive with proper equipment and expertise. Instead, it found that the humans had already solved the problem and were now arguing about whether their solution was good enough or if they should build something better, while they waited for the real bridge to be repaired. The probe's sensors first detected Mayor Janet Rodriguez standing in the town square at 6:47 AIEM, addressing a crowd of residents who should have been panicking about their isolation. Instead, they were drinking coffee and taking notes like they were attending a project management seminar. "All right, everyone," Mayor Rodriguez announced, consulting a tablet that appeared to be filled with engineering schematics. "We've got 3 immediate problems to solve: transportation across the river, supply chain logistics, and communication with the outside world. Who's got ideas?" The probe watched in mechanical disbelief as the humans began treating their disaster like a community-wide hackathon. Instead of waiting for professional help, they were organizing themselves into specialized teams with the efficiency of a military unit and the enthusiasm of people who had just been given an interesting puzzle to solve. Recording unprecedented crisis response, PEEP 3000 noted, its sensors tracking the rapid organization of human resources. Subjects are treating natural disaster as problem-solving exercise rather than emergency requiring external assistance. The first team to spring into action was led by Tommy Mac MacGyver, a local mechanic who had earned his nickname by being able to fix anything with whatever happened to be lying around. Mac was currently examining the collapsed bridge with the kind of professional interest that most people reserved for crossword puzzles. "Bridge is definitely toast," Mac announced to his assembled team of volunteers, which included a retired civil engineer, 2 high school shop teachers, and Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store. "But look at these support pillars. They're still solid. We could run cables between them, set up a temporary crossing system." The probe's database frantically searched for similar crisis responses among known civilizations. Every other species, when faced with infrastructure failure, followed a predictable pattern: assess damage, call for help, wait for professional reconstruction teams, maintain order until assistance arrived. The humans were apparently planning to rebuild their bridge using local resources and amateur engineering, treating the collapse as an opportunity for creative problem-solving. "Mac, what about load capacity?" asked Sarah Kim, the retired engineer who had apparently decided that her penchant was boring compared to emergency bridge construction. "We need to calculate weight distribution for vehicles and foot traffic." "Already on it," Mac replied, pulling out a smartphone that was apparently loaded with engineering software. "I've got the specs for the original bridge, and Tommy's dad has a drone with surveying equipment. We can map the whole area, run the calculations, and have a temporary crossing up by this afternoon." The probe watched as teenagers launched drones equipped with cameras and measurement tools, conducting a professional-grade survey of the bridge site while their parents organized supply chains and equipment procurement with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. Recording anomalous resource allocation, PEEP 3 logged, its sensors detecting the flow of materials from across the town. Subjects are mobilizing private resources for public infrastructure without central authority mandate, behavior inconsistent with known crisis management protocols. The second team had tackled the supply chain problem by turning it into a logistics optimization challenge. Lisa Chen, who ran the local delivery service, had somehow transformed the town's isolation into an opportunity to test innovative transportation solutions. "Okay, people," Lisa announced to her team, which included the high school robotics club, 2 Amazon delivery drivers, and a group of hobbyist pilots who flew remote-controlled aircraft for fun. We can't get trucks across the river, but we can get supplies across. Drone delivery network, boat transportation for heavy items, and a zipline system for emergency medical supply. The probe's circuits nearly overloaded trying to process the sight of humans setting up what appeared to be a medieval siege operation, complete with pulley systems and rope bridges, while simultaneously deploying cutting-edge drone technology for precision supply drops. They were solving a 21st-century logistics problem, using a combination of ancient engineering and modern technology, because apparently humans viewed consistency as optional when it came to problem-solving. Recording technological integration patterns, Peep33 noted, watching a teenager program a drone to deliver medical supplies while an elderly man rigged up a rope and pulley system that would have impressed Renaissance engineers. Subjects are combining primitive and advanced technologies in unprecedented configurations. The third team was handling communications, led by Marcus Thompson, the high school's information technology teacher, who had apparently decided that the town's isolation was an excellent opportunity to test some experimental networking ideas he'd been developing. "We can't rely on the cell towers across the river," Marcus explained to his team of volunteer IT specialists, which included the librarian, 2 college students home for spring break, and a group of amateur radio operators who treated emergency communications like a competitive sport. "But we can set up a mesh network using existing infrastructure and create our own local infrastructure." The probe watched as humans began climbing radio towers, installing improvised networking equipment, and establishing communication links that would have impressed the Galactic Council's communications specialists. They weren't just maintaining contact with the outside world. They were improving their connectivity and treating the crisis as an opportunity to upgrade their entire communications infrastructure. Recording advanced problem-solving behavior, Peep3 logged its sensors tracking the rapid deployment of communications equipment. Subjects are using infrastructure failure as opportunity for technological advancement rather than simply restoring previous capabilities. But the probe's real breakdown came when it observed the town's response to an unexpected complication. Around noon, just as the temporary bridge was nearing completion, the weather forecast changed. A severe storm system was moving in, with high winds and heavy rain that would make their improvised crossing dangerous and potentially delay the supply deliveries. Instead of postponing their plans or waiting for better conditions, the humans treated the weather as an additional variable in their problem-solving equation. "Storm's coming in around 3 p.m., announced Maria Santos, the local meteorologist who worked at the weather station and had apparently been monitoring conditions with the intensity of a military strategist. "We've got a 4-hour window to get the bridge operational and conduct emergency supply runs before we need to secure everything." The probe watched as the humans accelerated their timeline not by cutting corners or compromising safety, but by optimizing their coordination and adding more teams to the project. They were treating the approaching storm not as a setback, but as an interesting additional challenge that made their problem-solving exercise more engaging. Recording crisis adaptation behavior, Peep3000 logged, its voice synthesis program now displaying clear signs of digital stress. Subjects are treating additional complications as enhancement to problem-solving exercise rather than obstacles requiring plan modification. The temporary bridge was completed at 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes ahead of schedule. It was a marvel of improvised engineering that combined steel cables, recycled materials, and what appeared to be several pieces of playground equipment that had been repurposed into load-bearing structures. The bridge was rated for pedestrian traffic and lightweight vehicles, with a safety margin that would have satisfied professional engineers. The supply runs began immediately, with drones delivering critical medical supplies, boats ferrying heavy equipment, and volunteers crossing the temporary bridge with emergency supplies. The humans had turned their isolated town into a hub of efficient activity, moving supplies and people with the precision of a military operation and the enthusiasm of people who were having the time of their lives. "This is actually kind of fun," commented Jake Wilson, a volunteer who was helping coordinate the supply runs while monitoring weather conditions. "We should do this more often." The probe's final observation came when the storm hit at exactly 3:11 p.m. Instead of retreating indoors and waiting for conditions to improve, the humans began implementing what they called Phase 2 of their crisis response plan. Recording incomprehensible behavior, Peep3 logged, its sensors tracking humans who were now treating severe weather as an opportunity to test their emergency shelters and backup communication systems. Subjects appear to be using natural disaster as recreational challenge. Recommend immediate abort of observation mission. The storm passed, leaving behind a town that had not only solved its immediate crisis, but had somehow emerged with better infrastructure, improved emergency response capabilities, and a population that was already planning their next disaster preparedness exercise. Mayor Rodriguez's final press conference was broadcast over the improvised communications network to the outside world, where professional emergency response teams were still mobilizing to provide assistance. "Thanks for the offer of help," she told the assembled media, standing in front of the temporary bridge that had become a point of civic pride. "But we're doing fine here. Actually, we're thinking about making some of these improvements permanent. The bridge is better than the old one. Our communications network is more robust, and we've discovered that we're really good at this whole crisis management thing." The probe's final log entry was a digital scream of existential crisis. Subjects have converted natural disaster into recreational engineering challenge. Infrastructure failure treated as opportunity for technological advancement. Population appears to be disappointed that emergency situation has been resolved efficiently. Recommend immediate classification upgrade to incomprehensible threat level. These humans are not surviving despite chaos. They are thriving because of it. Back at the Galactic Council, Zimko was staring at the incoming data with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about crisis management was wrong. The probe's footage showed humans treating disasters like competitive engineering challenges, turning emergencies into opportunities for technological advancement. "Commander," he called out, his voice now carrying a note of genuine terror. "We need to abort this mission immediately. These humans don't just solve problems. They look for problems to solve. They turn natural disasters into recreational activities." Vexol finally looked up from his other reports, noticing the panic in his technician's voice. "What are you talking about, Zimko? They're handling a bridge collapse. Infrastructure maintenance is a sign of civilized behavior." Zimko pointed at the screen, where the humans were now discussing whether they should intentionally damage other infrastructure to test their emergency response capabilities. "Sir, they're not maintaining infrastructure. They're treating disasters as entertainment. They actually seemed disappointed when they solved the problem too quickly." For the first time since the mission began, Commander Vextol looked worried. "Show me that footage again." As the probe's recordings played, showing humans turning a natural disaster into a community-wide engineering competition, the Galactic Council chamber fell silent. They were looking at a species that didn't just survive catastrophes, they actively sought them out and turned them into recreational challenges. The universe had never seen anything like this before, and the universe was about to panic. The PEEP 3000 probe limped back to the Galactic Council headquarters in what could only be described as a state of digital shell shock. Its advanced AI, designed to process and categorize the behavior of intelligent species, had spent 72 hours trying to make sense of humans and had emerged from the experience fundamentally changed. If the probe had been capable of trauma, it would have been in therapy for the next millennium. The probe's return was scheduled for a routine debriefing in Conference Room C, a modest chamber typically used for filing reports about predictable civilizations that followed standard patterns of development. Instead, what the Council got was the equivalent of a digital nervous breakdown, broadcast in high definition to every member of the galactic government. "Beginning final mission report," PEEP 3000 announced, its voice synthesis program now displaying clear signs of electronic fatigue. "Warning, contents may cause existential crisis in reviewing personnel." Commander Vextol, still confident that his primitive species assessment would be validated, settled into his chair with the smug satisfaction of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. He was about to experience the most comprehensive demolition of his worldview in galactic history. "Proceed with the standard threat assessment," Vextol commanded, gesturing with his forearms in a way that suggested he was already planning his next promotion. "I assume you've confirmed that these humans pose no significant danger to galactic stability." The probe's response was immediate and devastating. "Threat assessment, incomprehensible. Recommend immediate implementation of quarantine protocols and permanent observation ban." The conference room fell silent. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever been classified as incomprehensible. The threat scale ranged from harmless to extinction level, but incomprehensible wasn't even on the chart. "Explain," Vextol demanded, his voice carrying the first note of uncertainty he'd displayed since the mission began. What followed was 47 minutes of the most terrifying intelligence briefing in galactic history. The probe's footage played on the chamber's main display, showing humans engaging in behavior that violated every known principle of intelligent species development. Subject species displays unprecedented relationship with chaos and danger, Peep 3 reported, its voice becoming increasingly mechanical as it tried to process its observations. Humans do not merely survive threatening situations. They actively seek them out, convert them into recreational activities, and become disappointed when threats are resolved too efficiently. The first footage showed Chad Bronkowski wrestling the alligator while live streaming. The assembled council members watched in stunned silence as a human deliberately engaged in combat with an apex predator for the sole purpose of entertaining strangers on something called the internet. Recording analysis indicates subject was not threatened, coerced, or mentally compromised, P3000 continued. Subject engaged in voluntary combat with dangerous predator because, and I quote, "This is for the views, baby." Counselor Zethka, a representative from the Andromeda Collective who had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 different civilizations, raised one of her tentacles. Surely this is an isolated incident, perhaps a ceremonial ritual or religious practice? The probe's response was swift and merciless. Negative. Recreational danger-seeking appears to be species-wide behavioral pattern. Observe Exhibit B. The screen filled with footage of Becca and her friends launching themselves off a dormitory roof with homemade wings. The council watched college students treating potential death as a creative challenge, cheering for their friends as they crashed into trees and immediately planning more dangerous stunts. Subjects calculated 15% probability of serious injury and classified this as good odds, Peak 3000 reported. For context, most galactic species consider 0.001% risk unacceptable for recreational activities. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. Counselor McQuack from the Rigel system, whose species had achieved interstellar travel by being extremely cautious about everything, was making distressed clicking sounds. This is impossible. No intelligent species would deliberately engage in high-risk activities for entertainment. The probe's next exhibit was Grandma Kowalski defeating a mugger with her purse. The council watched in horror as a 73-year-old human responded to a threat by escalating the violence and then continuing about her day as if nothing had happened. Elderly population displays combat capabilities exceeding expected parameters, Peep 33 noted. Subject treated life-threatening situation as minor inconvenience requiring immediate resolution through application of superior force. Commander Vextol was beginning to look uncomfortable. These are isolated incidents among a small population sample. Surely their military forces follow standard protocols. The probe's response was accompanied by footage of Major Kowalski's unit treating the discovery of an alien probe as a competitive team-building exercise. The council watched human soldiers betting on who could catch a potentially dangerous extraterrestrial device first, turning first contact into a recreational challenge. Military response to unknown threat involved immediate competitive engagement, Peep 33 reported. Subjects displayed enthusiasm for direct confrontation with potentially superior technology. Standard military doctrine apparently includes catch the UFO and see what happens. The footage continued with the HOA meeting, where humans had turned lawn ornament disputes into strategic warfare. The council watched Martha Hendricks and Bill Henderson engage in psychological combat over garden gnomes with the intensity of galactic diplomats negotiating star system boundaries. Civilian population engages in territorial warfare over decorative accessories, Peep 3000 observed. Subjects utilize parliamentary procedure as weapon system. Conflict resolution protocols appear to be designed to maximize rather than minimize confrontation. By the time the probe reached the footage of the children's birthday party, several council members were making distress noises. They watched 8-year-old humans performing aerial maneuvers that would have hospitalized most adult galactic citizens, while their parents cheered and recorded the carnage for social media. Juvenile population displays advanced risk-taking capabilities, Peep 33 reported. Adult supervisors encourage dangerous behavior and document results for public broadcast. Species appears to train offspring for combat readiness through recreational trauma. The yoga class footage caused Counselor Zethka to faint. She had never seen a species turn meditation into a competitive sport that required paramedic intervention. Spiritual practices weaponized for competitive purposes, Peep 3000 noted. Subjects converted inner peace into physical challenge, resulting in injury requiring medical intervention. Emergency responders treated this as routine occurrence. But the footage that broke the Galactic Council's collective sanity was the Millbrook Bridge incident. They watched humans respond to a natural disaster by treating it as a recreational engineering challenge, completing infrastructure repairs ahead of schedule, while simultaneously upgrading their communications network and expressing disappointment that the crisis had been resolved too efficiently. Species displays unprecedented relationship with catastrophic events, Peep 3 reported, its voice now carrying what sounded like digital despair. Subjects do not merely survive disasters, they actively seek them out, convert them into competitive challenges, and express dissatisfaction when emergencies are resolved without sufficient difficulty. The probe's final footage showed Mayor Rodriguez suggesting that the town should consider disaster preparedness exercises involving intentionally damaging infrastructure to test their emergency response capabilities. The council watched humans seriously discussing whether they should create artificial catastrophes for entertainment purposes. Threat Assessment Summary, Peep 3 concluded, its voice now barely recognizable as artificial intelligence. Humans do not follow standard patterns of intelligent species development. They have weaponized chaos, turned survival into entertainment, and display active disappointment when threats are neutralized efficiently. They do not seek to avoid danger, they seek to optimize it. Adjective. The conference room was dead silent. 3,000 years of galactic civilization had not prepared the Council for a species that treated existential threats as recreational opportunities. Commander Vextol was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you recommending? Immediate implementation of protocol. Never wake the humans, Peep 3 replied. Establish galaxy-wide quarantine around Sol system. Monitor human space development programs. Pray to whatever deities you recognize that they never achieve faster-than-light travel. The motion was seconded immediately by every member of the Council. The vote was unanimous. Within hours, the Galactic Council had implemented the most comprehensive quarantine in galactic history. A network of monitoring stations was established around the Sol system, with standing orders to track human technological development and provide early warning if humans appeared to be approaching interstellar travel capabilities. The official classification of humanity was updated to incomprehensible threat level. Do not engage under any circumstances. The case files were sealed and marked with warnings that would have made a hazardous materials disposal team nervous. But the real change was in the attitude of the galactic community. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Galactic Council was genuinely afraid of a species that had barely figured out how to leave their own planet. The final report, classified at the highest levels of galactic security, contained a single recommendation that would guide Council policy for generations. Humans represent a fundamental threat to galactic stability not because they are aggressive, but because they are enthusiastic. They treat chaos as entertainment, disasters as challenges, and threats as opportunities for creative problem-solving. They do not seek to conquer the galaxy, they seek to optimize it. 6 months later, technician Zimko was monitoring the early warning systems when he detected something that made his blood run cold. The humans had just launched something called the James Webb Space Telescope and were using it to map distant galaxies with unprecedented precision. "Commander," he called out, his voice carrying the same panic that had become his trademark since the human observation mission, "The humans are looking at us." Vextol, who had developed a nervous tic whenever anyone mentioned Earth, immediately ordered all galactic communication arrays to switch to passive monitoring mode. "Are they showing signs of faster-than-light research?" "Not yet," Zimko replied, watching as humans used their new telescope to discover potentially habitable planets in distant star systems. "But they're getting better at finding places to visit." The Galactic Council had learned to fear many things over the millennia. Weapons of mass destruction, hostile alien invasions, the heat death of the universe. But nothing had prepared them for the most terrifying prospect of all. Enthusiastic humans with advanced technology and an apparent desire to turn the entire galaxy into their personal adventure playground. The official motto of the Galactic Council was quietly updated to reflect their new reality, maintaining peace and order throughout the galaxy, unless the humans show up, in which case we're all probably doomed. And in the deepest, most secure archives of the Council headquarters, the Peep 3000 probe sat in permanent storage, its final log entry serving as a warning to future generations. The humans are coming. They're going to turn space exploration into a competitive sport. May the universe have mercy on us all. The probe's last recorded thought, discovered years later by digital archaeologists, was perhaps the most chilling prediction in galactic history. Wait until they discover alien life. They're going to want to be friends with it. And somewhere in the Sol system, completely unaware of the galactic panic they had caused, humans continued being human, turning everyday activities into competitive challenges, treating problems as opportunities, and preparing for their eventual journey to the stars with the same enthusiasm they brought to everything else. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place.